Get ready for the world's greatest Arsenal podcast. Welcome to another podcast by Guns and Yellow Ribbons. Enjoy the show.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Guns and Yellow Ribbons. This is a summer special. This special, we're continuing with our Arsenal history theme. And we're joined by, myself and Trevor, are joined by two excellent Arsenal historians, Andy Kelly and Mark Andrews. We're going to look at some of the questions that people want to put to them and some of the questions that Trevor has put together. And some of the reading material, some of the various very, very interesting stuff. We've done a lot of this a couple of summers ago with the guys. We've done a whole series of Arsenal history from 1886 to 2020. It was really, really interesting. I know Mark got a little bit bored once we moved north of the river. 1913 and before was more his speciality. But Andy was great with the facts and the figures and all about. My interesting one was through the war and when Highbury got bombed and so on. But guys, how are you doing? Andy, how are you, mate?
Very well, thank you.
I am liking the top. What is that top you've got on?
This is made by Toffs, and it was to celebrate 125 years of Arsenal being in existence. It's got the Woolwich coat of arms on it. The colour is unfortunately not quite historically correct. It's based on the red currant shirt that was believed to have been worn in 1913, Arsenal's first season at Highbury, but that colour didn't actually exist.
Yeah, we cover that one. We cover that one as long.
Yeah.
We got a more modern shirt on our man in the dark. Mark, how are you, mate? I'm loving the pink. She wore smiley face, bruised banana shirt. How are you doing?
Very well, sir. Very well.
Oh, Christ. As usual, you're full of conversation and you're going to make this so easy for me. Trevor, Jesus, do you remember this? Do you remember 2 summers ago? It was like pulling teeth at times. How are you, mate?
I'm all right, thanks, mate. But we know that once we get a subject that really gets Mark going, we know that he'll be going in full flow. Mate, you've got to. I love that new intro, by the way, but you have got to sort the volumes out because we could hardly hear you talking over it, mate. So if anyone didn't hear what Fergus was saying, this show is all about these two lads, Andy and Mark. Wonderful people, great historians, never failed to amaze me. You couldn't have too much time speaking to them, and I just want to thank you boys for agreeing to come back on and talk to us tonight. I'm sure we're going to have a good evening.
Yeah, if you do want to check out what the guys are doing, they've got their website, the Arsenal Collection, which has just got everything, programs, memorabilia, some photographs, other publications, and various books, and it's a labyrinth of information. And to be honest, Trev, there are some other websites that some people take on their phone into private spaces, but I think the Arsenal Collection is your special website, isn't it?
Yeah, undoubtedly it is, mate. I've said it before and I'll say it again for those that haven't heard me say it. Have a look on that website. It used to be the Arsenal History, didn't it? But now it's the Arsenal Collection. But don't have a look at it if you've only got a few minutes to spare, because it sort of leads you in. One part of it leads you into thinking about something else. So you look at that and then you move into something else, and then a result crops up and you think, who scored that goal in that game then? And you can go and have a look at that. And before you know it, a couple of hours has gone. It's such, for Arsenal fans, that I've never seen a more interesting website. And that includes Arsenal's own one, with the greatest respect to Arsenal, our great Arsenal Football Club.
And some people do use lesser publications to try and have their argument on Twitter, which we all 4 of us witnessed today. Some Nottingham Forest absolute melon trying to make a fool of himself. We'll get into that one, actually. That's one of the questions that we've got for later on. Andy, Mark, you've done a few books. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 books at least that you guys have done. Let's take a couple of minutes just to quickly talk over them. I've got one right here. That's yours, Mark. The Royal Arsenal, which is this one here. So it's clearly pre-1913. It's in the Woolwich Arsenal sort of time. Talk to us about that one.
No, it's in the Royal Arsenal Times, because that's what the title is.
Here he goes. It's only taking you 4 minutes. 4 minutes.
No, it's me, Andy, and Tim Stillman. We wrote it, and me and Andy wrote most of it, and Tim edited it because we wanted a slightly different angle on certain bits of writing. We wanted to sort of see a different sort of different slant on some things because we wanted to sort of, I don't know, make it a bit different. Oh yeah, I mean it's basically Arsenal 1886 to 1893.
And Andy, there's another one which I know I said I was going to bring up last, but I'll bring it up probably next. It's the one that Trevor referred to. Like he'll look up in a book, and it's the Arsenal, the complete record, and it's 1886 to 2018. Despite all the lobbying that Trevor has done, podcast after podcast after podcast, to try and bring it up to date. Hopefully, maybe you can give us some news on that. Talk to us about this book.
Yeah, that's a book that certain people have been saying that I should have written for, over the last 30 years, people that have known me that long. And we finally got around to doing it. So like 2016, we thought someone suggested the idea and pushed us into it. It's mainly, it's not mainly, there's a lot of statistical records in there. So it's full of lineups, and then how many games we've played against other teams, how many games every player that's played for Arsenal has played. But there's a lot of text in there as well, but right up of each season, and biographies of the 100 and odd best players that we've had, and managers. So there's a lot of text in there as well. We've been trying to push to update it, but there's a bit of an issue with the publisher. So we might have to look at a different angle to get a revised. I mean, it's been 5 years now. So if we could do one, it would be nice to get one that covers the forthcoming season and sort it out.
Would it be worth considering maybe doing part 2 or volume 2 so you could have with a different publisher?
We need to talk to the other chap we wrote it with, Josh James, the deputy program editor at Arsenal.
Okay.
We'd certainly love to do. There's a few things in there a few minor corrections that we need to make in there.
Yeah, I've noticed those.
Sorry?
I've noticed.
Did you notice Peter Nicholas?
I've only noticed the ones you boys told me about.
Yeah, I mean most of them are silly little things, like where we found out certain goals that were scored, they were actually scored as penalties, and some that were noted as penalties weren't actually penalties.
How far back are you talking about then? When you were saying some of these errors, these are like probably people wouldn't be alive to remember it. Am I right?
No, there's some that are in living memory.
Yeah, okay. There's some very there's one very contemporary one. Which is,
Go on then, enlighten us.
I don't know whether we should really.
Is it the Peter Nicholas one?
You just laid it out there. You got it.
Is it Peter Nicholas you're thinking of, Mark?
Yeah. Yeah, just a bit, yeah.
So what happened with Peter Nicholas then?
Yeah, well, so it's in the list of Arsenal Players of the Year, and for 1984, it's given as Peter Nicholas instead of Charlie Nicholas.
Okay. Listen, that's a mistake I'd make.
Yeah. We know why.
But I can't remember what it was at the moment. It has Peter Nicholas in some publication somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I've seen where it is, and it's etched in stone at one point.
Oh, okay.
There's a couple of other books which again go back to the Woolwich sort of time. You're looking at Woolwich Arsenal Football Club, 1893 to 1915, the club that changed football. That's one done by not that one. This one here, the club that changed football. That's done by both of you guys and Tony Atwood as well. Why did it change football then, Mark?
It's a bit of a marketing thing.
Okay.
Well,
the
point was we're the first Southern club, weren't we, to be in the league? So that was the the prima facie reason for putting that in.
And to be honest, that must have been a massive change to football in those days. The first Southern club, it changed the whole ethos of the league, didn't it? All these journeys had to be made. People had to come down and visit us. And, so it did change football massively, I think. Fergus, if you don't mind, I just want to I say this with a little grin on my face. Andy, when it comes to listing players in alphabetical order, Havertz fitted in very nicely, didn't he? That wasn't a problem
Perfect,
at all.
yeah.
Yeah. Straight after Havertz, isn't it?
That's it, yeah.
Hey, not difficult. Yeah, brilliant.
And the last book is a book we talked about, and I actually had read a couple of extracts. I don't read very much. I like to watch videos and stuff like that. But it was the crowd at Woolwich Arsenal FC, and I remember when we done around the time of the Invicta Stadium and the Manor Ground and all that sort of time. I asked a question of you guys, and I said men paid 3 pence to get in. Boys paid 2 pence and women got in for free. And I said, so that's because it was mostly a male-dominated sport and that women did. But you, I think it was you, Andy, that came along and explained that, it was very much a high society event.
Well, it's probably more likely to have been Mark, because that's his book, and that's what he picked up on.
He never says more than like 3 words. He never says full sentences,
No, what happened with the Invicta? The start of Invicta 1890 was that it was a society thing. So the papers all said about 40% of women went to games for quite a while. But generally, as it became more of a, the winter turned up and everything, more men went. But women still did go. I mean, there was quite a fair representation of women all the way through since when Arsenal started. Yeah, because there's quite often references to the mud on the terracing and stuff, destroying women's dresses and stuff because it was that bad and that deep. But actually, I would say on the crowd, I'm talking with the publisher to get that reprinted with a different cover and some other little bits and pieces in it. So I'm talking with Legends on that.
Oh, brilliant! No, it's you know what they as I said, I'm not a big reader, but these books and some of this information that I've got from you guys, I just always found really interesting and really fascinating. Some of the stuff, and I'm forever sitting in a pub somewhere talking to somebody, or even through work and stuff, and talking about Arsenal. I end up reciting little pieces that we've got. I suppose 2023-24 season, our new Arsenal shirt has got gold on it. It would have been nice if that's because we had won the league and then we're celebrating and having the gold patches and gold badges. We came very close, but I don't think that's what was originally intended in the design. It was to commemorate the Invincible season. Andy, what was your view on the Invincible season? Because Preston North End done it with a completely different league, completely different format, but the Premier League and the format that we're in, the Invincible season was a feat and a half. What's your view on that?
Well, yeah, I completely agree. It's a much better thing than what Preston did. It's a much longer season for a start. So I'm not sure if Preston went in the following season with 16 games undefeated from the start, which would have been the same length as ours. But I mean, the team then, it just seemed to be the most perfect set of players that you could get together. And then they all knew each other. And I don't know, they all just seemed to click. They were all at the right age, most of them. Bergkamp was probably a little bit older than being in his prime. But, there's all them players, all at the right age, and they all complemented each other. And there was the odd player that would drop out. Say Ashley Cole was injured. Gal Clichy came in and he did a fantastic job for him. Yeah. So it had taken Wenger several years, but I think that with Wenger he won too much too early. So he really Arsenal were in a transition stage when he took over, and he won the double in his second season. And the transition, which should have taken 4 or 5 years, happened very quickly. But then 98 was when the transition really started. So it was like 5-6 years after that when he got all them players together. And it was lovely watching them as well. It was fantastic watching them. Some of the, Henry and Bergkamp and Pires and Vieira, the way they interacted with each other, it's like they were all, psychic, and they knew exactly where each other was going to be.
Andy, you said about the Wenger almost peaked too soon, but why was that? Was that because of the foundation that was laid in before with him, with George Graham?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, he had a fantastic defence that he came in with, and he the players that he brought in that first summer of '97 were, he brought in some of the, some players that were fitted into the gaps that needed to be fitted into. And I don't want to say they were lucky, because towards the end of the season, they gelled just right, and they all came together, and they all hit top form at the same time at the end of '97, '98. But then if you look after that, we constantly finished second behind Manchester United. So that was when the transition really should have been happening. But like I say, he had an exceptional '97, '98 season.
Mm. Mark, what's your view on the Invincible season?
Same as Andy's, really. Not much to add to it, really, is there? But the one thing I would say, I know we were going about, did say this before, is you said about whether Wenger was a great manager, and I wasn't a big fan of his after a while. But if no other club within 20 years does the same thing, and he will be seen as a great manager, even by other clubs as well, because what he did in that season was remarkable, wasn't it? Really, what the club did was remarkable. Go through in modern football to not lose a game. Okay, it's only a trophy. It's only the same as it was gold, but it's only a league, isn't it? They could have lost 10 games to won it, type of thing. But
in theory, if they lost 10 games, there's no way they were winning that, because even Fergie said 5. I get your point.
You know what I mean? It's only a trophy. It's only one league trophy. So Ferguson won 13. Right?
We're struggling with your connection at the minute, or is it mine?
I think it's yours, Ferg.
Okay, all right. Okay, carry on then. Yeah, Trev, let me see if I can get my connection going, and you go with the next one.
Yeah, just before we move on, I always have to give 5 seconds to the fact that the Invincibles wouldn't nearly happen in 1991. People forget how good our 1991 side were. They were a fantastic team of young people, and injuries cost them in the end. We lost the game at Chelsea, and it was the only game we lost the season. As for the Invincible season, we mentioned Ferguson, and it's interesting because Ferguson says himself that he rates that achievement extremely highly, and coming from that man, that they're great words. But yeah, what a fantastic season. So, right, talking about great players and great seasons, either in your lifetime, boys, or people that you've read about or you've statistically seen. Who's your best player that's ever played for the Arsenal, do you think? Go, Mark, you go first. Go on.
Bergkamp.
Yeah. Yeah. Why?
He's a good player. Not much more you can say, really. I mean, the quality he had, the ability to drift, and he played balls through different angles. No one else could see that. And a lot of times, no one else could see what he was doing, and then all of a sudden he did it.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
Fergus has gone.
Yeah, he'll be back. He'll probably just check his.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a toss-up for modern between Bergkamp and Henry, isn't it? But I think Bergkamp was a better player.
Yeah. People also forget that Bergkamp was an amazing player, and he also had a bit of a nasty streak in him when he needed to use it, didn't he?
Oh yeah,
yeah. What about you then, Andy?
I would go with Henry.
Yeah,
because I think he just had the consistency. He was until he like the injuries towards the towards the end of his time at Arsenal, and once he started scoring, was it 99, 2000, wasn't it? He had a bit of a slow start, but then he started scoring and he just didn't stop. It just went on and on and on. And the quality of the goals was absolutely fantastic. Some of the things, I can remember one he scored against Chelsea where he was clean through against Cudicini and he's running at him. And then he's done a 360 to spin around to get himself past Cudicini. And he's got an empty net there. And, sitting in the North Bank watching that, he just ended up going, what did he just do there?
Yeah.
But historically, I would, obviously we didn't see him play, but I would go with Alex James just through the amount that I've read about him, not just in recent history books, but in contemporary articles in newspapers and that. And, what other former players have said about him. Alex James must have been an absolute, fantastic player.
For his time, yeah. So we're so lucky in our great club that there's so many names we could say, isn't there? And no one could really argue it. You can make a point for all of them. I mean, if you look back at or think back on Thierry Henry's goals, I can't think of a boring one. And even when he wasn't scoring goals, he was making people like Danny Mills look an idiot by the corner flag, just an amazing player. But I'll say mine first, and then we'll ask Fergus. But I'm with Mark. I go for Bergkamp. I do. I just the time he had to play the game and the skills he had, and he was another one. He never scored for his first few games. It was in the newspapers that we'd wasted our money buying Dennis Bergkamp. And that wasn't newspaper reports. There were some top players and managers saying that we'd wasted our money. And, oh, my God, how wrong they were, because he was just sublime to watch. Sublime to watch. What about you, Ferg?
Well, I can't go for the hand of frog, Thierry Henry, as much as I think he's absolutely fantastic. But it's Irish law, and I'll be banished by all the leprechauns and fairies and everything else down the bottom of the garden. So I probably would say Bergkamp, because of just. As you know, I was a later comer to watching football, so I didn't see the likes of Brady. I saw Brady play for Ireland. I saw lots of people play for Ireland in the past. But in an Arsenal shirt, I'd probably have to say Dennis Bergkamp. But you know what? There's a few coming up on the radar right now. You got Saka, you got Odegaard, even Saliba and Martinelli. Zinchenko as well, just because of his heart and passion. There's a few in this current crop. That could end up being players that we'll all look back on very, very, very fondly. If you would think back on managers, Mark, and knowing the history that going right back to 1886, who would you say the greatest ever Arsenal manager was?
Chapman.
Why?
I've said it before, because he basically kept the club going even after he died. We carried on winning for what? Almost 20 years after he died, basically. He instituted a way of playing, and he had a boot room, and it just went on. So there was him, Shaw, Allison, Whittaker. We carried on playing the same way after he had set it up, which is something that he didn't get with the person Andy's probably going to say.
Andy, clearly Mark knows you well enough to know that it's not Chapman for you.
I would actually say Chapman. Because
you will say Chapman.
Yeah.
He done that on purpose, didn't he?
Yeah.
So why Chapman for you then? And aside from Chapman, answer that bit first. And aside from Chapman, who would you then put into that? Looking at the whole history of the club over nearly 150 years.
Okay, when you look at what Arsenal had done before Chapman came along, I think the highest position they'd finished in the league was 9th. Yeah, and the season before he took charge at Arsenal finished one place above the relegation zone. Okay, he came in, he made one signing, and Arsenal spent a lot of time at the top of the table that season, his first season, and ended up finishing 2nd. And so he completely transformed that team overnight with just one signing. Although there were a couple of others towards the end of the season. But then, as Mark said, he started to put in place. He started bringing in players at the right time, and he wasn't going out and buying all the big stars. He did for one or two of them, James and David Jack. But he went down and he bought a lot of players from lower leagues and from non-league, and he had an eye for a player. He bought Eddie Hapgood from Kettering and George Mal from Clapton. And throughout the whole of the 1930s, they played virtually every game as the two fullbacks, and both of them captained England. So he had the eye for a player, and he perfected this WM system that they keep banging on about Pep Guardiola playing. He perfected it in the 1930s, and as Mark said, he put in place a backroom staff that kept the club winning up until the early 1950s, 20 years after he died. And then after him, I would put George Graham, because George Graham did something almost similar to Chapman, in that he came in and he took a team that was going absolutely nowhere. They won the FA Cup in '79 and not won anything since 1971. And there were a lot of players there that it was very cliquey, a lot of players who had big egos, and he got rid of all of them, and he brought in again players from lower leagues, Dixon, Bold, and he got them all to play, and I think that's what Arteta has been doing over the last couple of seasons as well. Is bringing in players that are not necessarily big egos, but the right sort of players that he can mould and manipulate into playing for him. And George Graham, that's what George Graham did. And you look at his record of what he did in his 9 years at Arsenal, and it's fantastic.
In the chat, we got Kevin Treese, which Trevor put up a few minutes ago after Chapman. He'd give a shout out for George Graham, as you said, Wenger. And Mark, what's your view on Bertie Mee?
Love him.
Expand. Jesus.
Won a double. We won a double with him, mate. We won the first double, which I think if you're going to ask questions what the best trophy is, that for me is the best, because it came absolutely. I mean, okay, we won the Fairs Cup the week before, but it came absolutely out of nothing that we won a double. There was no indication that we were going to win everything, and we did.
Go on. You haven't said who you'd rate as your best manager, and then you can expand on the trophy side of things.
Well, for me, I'm with the boys. It's Chapman for me, and just to sum it up quickly for me, I think that without Chapman, nothing else follows, So we've all got to be thankful to Chapman for what he put in place, the stadium, the facilities, a stadium that was built. When was it? When was the East and West Stand built, boys? 1930? 1932. A stadium that was built in 1932 was still good enough to attract players in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. It was that good, It was so far ahead of themselves. So Chapman for me is the man that got the ball rolling, that made up the Arsenal. I have a lot of time for all the others that Kevin named there, and I can't argue with what Andy says about George Graham. George Graham took a side that was going nowhere, and it was full of prima donnas, really, Andy, for want of a better phrase. And he got rid of them, and he moulded a team that turned out to be a superb football team. And it very much reminds me of what Arteta's doing at the moment. I think Arteta's done the same thing, and now we hopefully, fingers crossed, this season we start to reap the rewards from his work. So for me, I'm with the boys. Chapman. Without Chapman, the Arsenal's not the Arsenal for me. But all right, moving on then. Fergus wants me to ask the next question. Of all the trophies we've won, maybe it doesn't have to be a trophy, but what in your eyes is the club's greatest achievement? Mark, do you want to say your couple of words first, mate, and then we'll get an answer off of Andy?
It won't be more than two.
What's our greatest achievement then, Mark? Come on. Is it a trophy or is it something else?
It depends, doesn't it? As I said, if no one else goes through a season without losing, then you have to say 2003, 2004 league. You have to, because no one else has done it. But if someone else does it, then it devalues the currency to a point. But my favourite was 79 FA Cup, to be honest.
Why is that?
Just makes me ask about you mentioning that.
Because we scored in the last minute, and we all thought we'd blown it. We're all sitting there crying, thinking what's going on, and then Big Al turned up and scored. But And also the 71 double was just phenomenal when you actually read about it. It was,
it's really interesting, right? Because I was at that game, the 79 final, right? And I didn't see the winning goal go in.
What? Really?
I was still sat on my backside sulking from them scoring the equaliser. I was gutted. I was only 17. I'd had 2 beers and I was feeling a bit tipsy, I suppose. And when their second goal went in, and my head went in my hands and my head went down. And when I looked up, Alan Sunderland slotting the ball in the net again, and we're all happy again. Wonderful day. Wonderful day.
Andy,
So Andy,
what's your greatest achievement, trophy, whatever?
It's here. You can't quite see all of it. It looks like a Jackson Pollock, but it's a pass map of every pass in the Anfield game, 1989 Anfield. So for me, that was the greatest, because to go to Anfield and win 2-0 where they hadn't lost 2-0 at home for years, and beat Liverpool, who had won the league year in, year out throughout the 70s and the 80s. And that time as well, that was probably their best team. They had Barnes in there, and I can't remember who the rest of them were. But it was like one minute, yeah. But it was a really solid team that they had. And they only won the league once. They won the league the following season, but I think that what we did there was the end for them. It killed off that era that they had.
Yeah.
One of the things that you guys do, as well as write a lot of books and everything else, but one of the a book that you did write was the Arsenal Matchday program. You wrote it in association with Arsenal, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. But if we were to look at programs, what's the most valuable or what match program that you have or that you've seen?
I'm getting the ump with you now. I'm getting a right ump with you now, folks. I'm getting a proper ump with you now, because you've got to ask me these questions as well, Because I'm learning off these boys all the time. I'm going into a sulk. If you're not careful, Ferg, I'm going into a full-on sulk. Toys out of the pram, the lots.
Go on, answer then.
Well, you're asking me, are you?
Well, I asked another question, but you want to rewind.
I'll ask Trev. What's your favourite trophy that we've won?
Thank you very much, Andy, for that. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Once again, we're lucky in that we can, as we just have, name a few, and you can't argue against any of them. But I think that, as Mark said, the Invincibles, 49 games undefeated, was something that is unlikely to be equalled for however long we know. It was a fantastic achievement. At times we played against 12 men, and in the end it was the 12th man that beat us in the 50th game, wasn't it? And I don't care who quotes me on that. I will believe till the end of my days that it was the 12th man that beat us in that 50th game of the unbeaten run. So that for me is great. The 79 final was wonderful, but the one I remember most of all was the 71 final, when I was only 9 years old, and I can remember Liverpool scored, and I was sat in front of the telly, and my dad said to me, "That's it, done now, son. This Liverpool side's too good now. Extra time, we're 1-0 down. That's it. It's all over. It's done." And I went, "Oh no, Dad!" And I was nearly in tears. And then bang, we win 2-1. Charlie's forever my hero, So lucky, wonderful times we can talk about. Plenty of them.
Trev, you've sent me the program for my first ever game I attended to. You've got the one from your one. You've got collections of years and years of programs, and you use these guys' website as a fantastic reference and point. The question I asked before was rudely interrupted by my learned friend, as they say. Andy, what's the most valuable match program that you know of, and what one do you have that you deem as, or is the most valuable Arsenal program?
Well, it's a difficult one, because I know some that exist that have probably not been sold on the open market, and they're very incredibly rare. So it's hard to know what the value of them is. So there's one I know of that's a game against Israel. It played against Israel in the mid-60s, and I only know of one that exists. So amongst collectors, that must be almost priceless. In fact, I know the person who's got a copy of it. But as for those that have been sold, there's the 1968. It wasn't really an Arsenal one. It was a game at Arsenal. It was a 1968 European Cup final replay between Man United and Benfica. So they printed some programs, or they printed the programs in anticipation of it going to a replay, but it didn't. And so the printer then pulped all of the programs bar 2. And the print, one of the people who worked at the printers, he kept hold of them, and he gave them to a friend of his called John Daniels, who's quite a well-known Arsenal program. He buys and sells programs, and he kept them in a drawer for years and years and years. And I'm not sure if one or both of them have come onto the open market, but one of them sold for about £6,000 a few years back. But it's not even a proper program. It's what it is. Imagine that you've got a 16-page program, and it's all printed on a great big sheet, front and back. And then what they do is they get a machine that folds it all up into the correct order, and then they guillotine the edges to make it into a program. And the guy that I know that's got it has got this sheet.
Got the print sheet. Oh wow!
Yeah, so it's the printer's proof of it.
And there's one that you shared with me as well that you've got from more modern times, 21, 22.
Yeah. So it was. It's not even a full program. It's just the cover of the program. It's for the Carabao Cup semi-final against Liverpool, where it was postponed. I think we had a COVID issue again, didn't we? We had postponed the game, and so they had the covers made up, ready for the program, because they like to get that before they get all the content together. And the club got a load of these printed, and again they're on big sheets with four of these front and back pages together on the page, and they had them printed out. And so I've actually still got a sheet of them, but I've got some of them, and I chopped them up and put one on eBay for charity, and it sold for about £275.
Oh wow! And I can see on the front of this, I know it's Liverpool versus Arsenal, but there's Arsenal Man City in there. Is that an error on there, or is that just?
No, that's from the previous game, and it's an unusual picture to have on the front of an Arsenal program, because it's a defeat, and they tend not to put. Even if we've lost the previous game, they'll find a game within 2 or 3 games before where they'll put a non-defeat on it as the picture on the front of the program.
Yeah, or it would just be the Arsenal player, wouldn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
And talk to us a bit about that book then, Mark, that you've done, the program book. This one.
Arsenal published it as in once I can't remember which season it was. We wrote quite a few articles, a lot of articles on specific styles of programs. To be fair, Andy wrote virtually all of them, and Andy Exley, the Arsenal program manager, editor, basically put them into a book, and then just chop and changed it. But it is very, very rare, in that it was on sale, I think, for a day or two, and then it sold out, and they didn't reprint it. So I mean, it was Andy did the work. Andy actually did the work for it to set it up, but the original writing was by ourselves, and then he, top and tailed it and put it all together.
Trev, you're an avid collector of programs. I've witnessed them hanging out of door cupboards. The ever-suffering lovely Donna has to step over them, climb round them. Nancy sleeps among them. What's your favourite one?
Oh, my lordy. Well, do you know what's funny? Because I was only pulled up by these two boys last week, because I don't know why we started talking about it, but we talked about the 1971 FA Cup final program, and I said, yeah, I've got that one. A lot of people have got it. And they went, but you do know there's 2 different ones, don't you? And I didn't, so I've had to go out and hunt down the other one. So I've added that. I thought, right, I've got that now. I've got 2 of those. And before I could breathe again, they should be, and 1980, there's some different ones to that as well. So I've just hunted that one down as well. So I haven't got a favourite program, Fergus. I've got thousands of programs, and I still just every now and again I'll go in a filing cabinet and pull out and flick through them. And I must admit that I prefer the older programs, mainly because they're easier to collect because they're stories. Yeah, that what you can get 2 programs from the current time in a folder, you'll get a whole season in the past. So I tend to collect anything before the year 2000. I don't go past that because I just wouldn't have the space to store them. But I haven't got a favourite, mate, really. I just love collecting programs, and they make me smile. I read every single program in my collection. I have read every single one, and
I'm disappointed because I thought it was going to be the Everton away 1955 game, because I bought you the program when I was up with Dan up at Goodison for a birthday. I bought it for you for my birthday.
Well, I wasn't going to disappoint you, but I already had that one, mate. So
I want my tenner back.
I didn't already have it, mate, and it was a pleasure to put it in the 1955 folder and read through it. And okay, that's my favourite ever. 1955 away, brilliant program.
Lads, memorabilia is a big thing. Anything from what I've got up here, which is signed by Arsene Wenger and Llewellyn, the Wenger print, and I know where the original home is, and some of this stuff goes for fortunes. Mark, what's your view on memorabilia? What sort of memorabilia do you like collecting, if any? And what's your favourite piece, if you've got it?
No, I haven't got a huge amount. My favourite piece is the 1913 block drawing of Woolwich Arsenal moving to Highbury, which I think I worked out. I did work out. It's stamped by the council in June. I think June the 16th. It's got a stamp on it, like the old stamps they put on the stuff like that. And it's from Archibald Leach's sort of his practice, the architect who designed it.
Is that for this stand?
No,
yes,
that was so yes, but it wasn't actually built until later, was it, Andy?
So
it wasn't finished, was it? It was.
Yeah, it wasn't finished.
Yeah,
it started. So yeah, it's that pink. Yeah, it's the grandstand shown there.
Okay,
but it wasn't sort of finished for a year or two after they moved in.
The other side of that plan I find really interesting, in that further up, it's not in that picture, unfortunately, but where the road narrows on the west side of the ground, you'd have never thought they'd have got that amazing standing on that side, would you?
No.
Clever work took place to squeeze that stand in there. Yeah,
Fergus, that picture, have you got that Mark sent you, the block of the of Highbury in 1913? Have you got the whole of the picture? Because a little bit further up, there's a bit that was. So if you have a look, if you look at the brown bits, there's a bit of brown that goes in between some houses on the
on Avenel Road. No, Gillespie Road, isn't it?
It's in Gillespie Road. So it's pretty much opposite the tube station, which is where there's an entrance. The entrance still exists there. So Arsenal actually had to buy a couple of houses to form that entrance. So there used to be the terrace went all the way along, but to get to that part of the ground, Arsenal actually had to buy 2 houses.
And correct me if my memory isn't failing me, but when Trevor talks about the West Stand as it existed on Highbury Hillside, didn't you say that they had to support all the gardens because it was an inclination, or there was like a mound that they had to do to try and support they didn't fall in on the other houses? Is that the case?
What happened was, it wasn't too long. It was towards the end of the first season they were there, and so they built a wall to separate them from the gardens in them houses. And one evening there was like a huge downpour, and what it did was it washed away all of the the supporting material were on the opposite, on the garden side of the wall. And what they had to do was Arsenal, the directors themselves, decided to close the ground themselves. They were due to play the following day, I think, and they risked the wrath of the Football League for postponing a game without notice. And basically what they did was they got a load of labourers in, and they just shoveled a load of dirt from the garden side over into the stand side to sort of like and push the wall back a bit to support it.
Yeah, I remember you, when we were talking about moving to Highbury and stuff. You mentioned it before, so see, some of it does stick in there. You know, it does work.
Yeah.
There was a couple of bits of memorabilia that you shared with me, Andy. There was one, the Arsenal 1914-15 handbook. Do you want to talk to us about this?
This is something that I bought in the late 90s. I've got a thing about Arsenal handbooks. I'd like to think I'm missing just 2 of them. There may be some before this, but this is recognised as being the first Arsenal handbook. And it's written by George Allison, and it's a fantastic little handbook. It's a bit hard to explain it on a screen, but I suppose it's probably about 4 or 5 inches, 10, 15 centimetres high, and about 3 or 4 inches wide. It's well over 100 pages in there, and it's in fantastic condition, apart from the cover has come loose. But on every other page, there's a photograph of a director or a player or a member of the backroom staff. And then there's a write-up on them, and there's a history of the club. And it's actually on the Arsenal Collection website. So you can go and have a look at it. And you just look through it, and it's just wonderful reading it as well.
How long have you had it?
I think I paid about 100. I remember I paid 150 quid for it.
Oh, wow.
One went for about 1,500 quid a few years ago at auction.
So it's probably worth even more than that. What would you say that the most expensive piece of memorabilia out there is?
From what I've seen Peter Storey's double winning medals, the league and FA Cup winning medals. Here we go. They were on Graham Budd's auction. Graham Budd always gets some absolutely fantastic items. Him and Sporting Gold are the 2 main auction houses. Those 2 medals there, they went for £28,000, and I'm not sure. I can't think of any for more than that. I've seen some shirts go for about £20,000, match run shirts from the 30s. But £28,000 is a hell of a lot.
Trevor, 28 grand is nothing. It's just a drop in the ocean to you. You know, is that a bit you?
Do you know what, mate? And I say this with there's no joviality in this. I'll say it with the most sincerity. If I was in a position where I could spend 28 grand and not miss it, I would have bought their medals. And do you know what I'd have done with them? I'd have given them straight back to Peter Storey. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know why I'm speculating. I may be wrong, but there'll be a reason that man sold them medals, and I wouldn't have wanted him to be without them. And I say it with utmost sincerity and seriousness. If I'd have had 28 grand sitting in the bank that I could do without, I'd have bought them and given them back to him, mate.
Yeah. No, I understand that, because there's many a story they've talked about. They talked about Kenny Sampson, I think, about selling medals and caps and various bits and pieces.
That happened with a lot of players, because you've got to remember, before the 1990s, these players weren't earning much more than you or I. I remember reading an article about Lee Dixon when he joined Arsenal, and Ian Allinson as well. They said they couldn't believe the price of houses when they came down south, and they were worried that they couldn't actually afford to live down here. And you think about now, players are getting multi-million pound signing on fees, and then 100 grand a week, and Lee Dixon, he signed in 1988, was it?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a long time before the Premier League started, and he was worried about not being able to afford to live in London.
I'm friends with an ex-professional footballer, played at Millwall, Rangers, Southampton, Fulham. I'm sure you can figure out who I'm talking about. A proper bruiser, and I've spoken to him, and I know the sort of money that they were on. Yeah, they were on good money for the day, but not on this ridiculous money that like players are on now. And you talk about mortgages and prices of houses. I've been fortunate enough to be able to see.
Is it me or is he gone?
I'm here. I'm still here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who is this? Who is this player you know, Fergus?
Millwall, the Terry Hurlock.
Oh, I didn't know.
Sarcasm is.
He played for a couple of non-league teams before, didn't he?
He's played for quite a few teams, and it was just interesting. Like the time I sat, I've met him quite a number of times. He's a really good guy, but the time I sat and had the best conversation with him ever was Arsenal were playing Chelsea in a pre-season friendly in the Birdcage just after the Olympics in Beijing. And I think it was a 12:30 kickoff. The wife was out and everyone was out. Wandered over the pub. There's only me and Terry Hurlock sitting there, and we're just sitting reminiscing and talking about stories. He saw some old players who were on the telly who were doing punditry stories, and he was just waxing lyrical about a few different things, and it was just really interesting. And that's where I come up with knowing, as I said, they were on good money in comparison to you bloke, but they're not on the mega money that people are on nowadays. Mark, the funniest story you've ever heard about Arsenal Football Club? What's the funniest one that would make us go, "You're joking"? I've asked the wrong guy, haven't I? So clever. I've asked the wrong.
To be fair, I like the Parlour story, which I can't remember it though. The one in his book about having 4 or 5 pints. Obviously, it's made up. Him having 4 or 5 pints before his debut, not thinking he was going to get on at Anfield, and then they said, "Oh, you're lining up," and they said something, "I'll let him finish his pint before he goes on," type thing. Obviously, I'm not told particularly well, but when you read it, it's a great story.
Andy, do you have a story that you can tell us, whether it's like funny, shocking, unbelievable?
Not off the top of my head, I must admit.
Actually, no. Shocking. Sorry, Andy. Shocking.
Yeah.
When we were doing stuff about pre-First World War stuff, we found some chap that committed suicide by jumping in front of a train.
Oh wow!
Things like. I'm pretty certain from his post-Arsenal things he was an alcoholic, but it was pretty obvious from reading all the reports that he committed suicide. So that's pretty shocking, really. When you read, there's quite a few stuff. There's quite a lot.
Was he a player or a fan or
what? Player. Yeah, player.
Oh wow!
Yeah, but it goes back to the fact that they weren't paid any more money. Well, they were paid probably a little bit more than the blokes in the armaments and and skilled workers. But he obviously drunk it all away and then sadly did that. But there's quite a few shocking stuff.
Yeah, Andy, there's quite a few of that. There's quite a few of them around about that time, because they were paid. They were on £2 a week. I know it's good. It's fairly good money, but a lot of them players were living in. They were boarding in someone's house. They were, they were in a spare room. They couldn't even afford their own house when they came down and played for Arsenal.
Trev, you won't be asked these questions. Have you got any funny stories? Most of them probably happened in the Woodbine last season, but
Well, to be honest, the one that always makes me laugh is a game I was at, and I can't remember whose testimonial it was, but before the game kicked off, Ian Wright threw all the playing shirts out the window to the fans. So the game was delayed for kickoff. The game was delayed while they shot down the Arsenal shop and found another set of shirts in the Arsenal shop because Wright had lobbed them all out the window. But the other thing, and I can only remember bits of this story, but I'm pretty sure it was Ray Parlour that told the story. The boys might be able to put me right here. But towards the end of his career, Arsenal were going to win the league, and Martin Keown was on the bench, and he needed one more appearance to get a league winners medal. And Arsene had said to him, Martin, don't worry. I will bring you on. I will bring you on. And anyway, there's about 5 minutes to go, and Martin Keown's panicking, pacing up and down the touchline. Wenger's only got one sub left, and I think it was Parler. Parler started stripping off, and Keown came running up to him and said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And Parler said, "Oh, the boss has just told me to get stripped off. I'm going on." And Martin Keown went into a blind panic bowl of cancer, and then I think it was Parler said to him, "Not really." Pulled his kit back on, and then 1 week going and got his winner's medal. But you can imagine that happening, can't you? You know, you can imagine it happening. I'm sure it was Ray Parler told that story, but I couldn't be certain.
Trev, go on the next question then. You since you're in full flow.
Oh, you've lost me now. If you could, boys, you know all about games, right? So if you could go to any match that you've looked at statistically from pictures, or even been to, if you could any match, what match would you go back and like to see again? Mark.
To be on the ferry in 1886 on the Millwall to watch that game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Damn,
Because
I wanted to say that.
I know. If we did, then we'd actually know what the lineup was properly, rather than what we assume and think it was. Because I think that the secretary played in goal, rather than we know Bees didn't play in goal that game, but I think the secretary Elijah Watkin played in goal that game, but we don't know, so we're never going to know.
Andy,
that would be the one, basically.
all right. Andy, pick another one or expand even.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would love to have gone to see that the very first game. Stood on the sidelines, and they're probably all the players would be looking at us going, "Who's bloody hell's these people come to watch us play?" Who knew that we were playing here? But no, I'd probably like to go and see one of the games in the 1930s where Alex James and Cliff Bastin were on top form. It's sort of like no game in particular, but any one of them where they were running riot. I mean, we scored a lot of goals some of them seasons. I think there was 1 or 2 games where we scored 8 goals and we beat Darwin in the FA Cup 11-0 or 11-1. So something like that, to see them guys on top form.
Actually, another one would be I think it's 30. I think it's 35. Then Sunderland when it was 0-0. It was 0-0, but it was the highest hybrid crowd. To be in that crowd, 73 was it 73? Was it Andy 73? 71? I can't remember now. To be in that crowd would be incredible. Just to witness the two best.
I actually met someone who was at that game.
Oh, really?
And he was at the Leeds game in 65-66 when there were only 4,500 people there.
Actually, that's another one to go and see as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
If I was to relive a game, it would probably be a bit more modern because, again, my late coming to Arsenal, how everybody talks about, and especially after last season, doing so many away games, I would have just absolutely, it made me go cold at the thought of it, absolutely loved to be at Anfield in '89. Trev, could you imagine me? I think I'd still be drunk today, don't you?
Yeah, you would be unbearable, mate, I reckon. But do you know what? You're unbearable when you're sober, so Jesus, mate. It's funny you should say that because I've got that game. I've made a little list. Firstly, I'd go back to '79 Cup final and not go into assault when Man United scored the equaliser and actually score our bloody winner. I'd have tried much harder to get a ticket in '89. I didn't try that hard to get a ticket in '89 because I didn't think we had a hope in hell, and I'm embarrassed to say that, but I'm not going to lie about it. And then, do you know what else I'd like to do, Ferg? I'd like to get a lot of these lads and people that go to the Emirates nowadays. They've never ever stood on a terrace, and I'd like to get a load of them in a packed North Bank when the Arsenal scored a goal and watch their faces when they just completely lost control, got moved left, right, and centre, lifted up in the air, squeezed all the wind out of them. That's something that the young fans nowadays have never, and thankfully probably will never experience. But I'd love to see their faces when the goal went in on that terrace.
The only place I've ever experienced that was Athlone Town back in Ireland, and there was a cowshed with a bit of terrace, and there wasn't that much of a sway or a crush. But I look back at some of those pictures, and you look at like the FA Cup final, played it in lockdown, and you see the sway in some of the stands. As I said, Kevin puts up the 1971 White Hart Lane when we won the league there. And he's talking about he couldn't see Sodol, who's only 11 years of age. Another really good point that we're talking about from about wages. Gavin from She War has mentioned. Oh, let me pop this one up.
Sorry, son. Go on.
Yeah. Players used to get half wages in the summer. His granddad used to get Vic Groves a job helping laying carpets. So yeah, it just proves that it wasn't all milk and honey back then.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, Arsenal player Tommy Lawton. I think he became destitute. He ran a pub and everything. But he was in England international. Played for Everton. Played for Arsenal. Played for lots of big clubs. The money just wasn't there. I mean, I don't know whether he didn't use his money properly or whatever. Mate, he probably did, or whether he got. But I think it's one of those things where it's so different now. It's just a different. Absolutely, it's just you couldn't describe it. I would have thought to a player in the 1950s what the money they get now.
Well, I first came to London in '88, and not far from where we had a pub in the West End down near Marble Arch. George Best had a couple of pubs, and George had his demons and issues and everything else, but. That's how he made his living. He had to graft still for his living after football was finished. He had to run a few pubs, and nowadays these players finish, and they're at 35 they can, if sensible, they can retire for life, and the families are wealthy forever. Unfortunately, they reckon 35% of players go bankrupt before they're 40 because they're badly managed and people hanging around them. Listen, I'm conscious that we got some questions in from some people in the chat. We got some that some people put on Twitter, but I've got a few books I want to go through. But before I do that, there was one question and a debate that came up before, like. You talk about the Royal Arsenal, Mark, and then there's the Herbert Chapman. We were the Arsenal when we moved across the water. And then Herbert Chapman allegedly dropped the to put us A at the top. And Andy, I can see you jumping at the bit. Come on, talk to me. We're still at Company's House. At Company's House, it still says the Arsenal Football Club, and this is as a creation in 20th of May 2021 is that one, so that's still modern.
That's actually changed recently because it said on there it says Public Limited Company, but now it's just the Arsenal Football Club Limited.
Okay,
it's no longer a public company. So there's the name registered with Company's House, the limited company name, and it's always had the at the beginning. Because on the form that they filled in, it always had the anyway. So when they became the first time they incorporated themselves as a company, they were the Woolwich Arsenal Football and Athletic Company Limited. So and every company had the at the beginning of it. At some point, whoever was what the equivalent of Company's House was, they took away that word the off of their form. So you can, if you try to open up a limited company now, it hasn't got the word the on it. But Arsenal have always retained it. So, from when they reincorporated in 1910. So there's that name, but there's also the name that they like to be known, they want to be known as within whatever league they're playing in. So in up until in 1915, they changed their name from Woolwich Arsenal Football Club to the Arsenal Football Club, which is how they were known as in the league, or to the league, the Football League. And then in 1919, they dropped the word the, and we got two programs. Unfortunately, we haven't got the one in the middle, so we got two programs. They were league games. One that shows it on the masthead, the Arsenal Football Club, and then the next one just says Arsenal Football Club. So that the was officially dropped by the club in 1919. and it wasn't Herbert Chapman that did it. But with Company's House, it's always been at the beginning.
So, Mark, talking about books, what would be? Obviously, you've published, between the two of you, you've published 5 or 6 books, along with Tim and Tony and all the other guys who you've worked really hard to publish books with. What would you say is your favourite 2 or 3 books that you that you would say, other than your ones, that you like?
Probably. Well, you can't say your own, can you? Tossell's book about 1971 FA Cup. No, not that one. David Tossell's book. Can't remember what it's called, but it's about
71 Guns.
It's just such a good. It's so. He interviews all the players and he gives you different. It encapsulates anything you can want about a book about a football club. Is that book? It's just brilliant. And if you don't read a lot, Fergus, make sure you read that, because it brings it all together. It shows you why Peter Simpson was called Stan. It's got loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of different things in there that you wouldn't have known about unless he'd spoken to the players and just brought it all out onto the page. It is so good. It's brilliant.
Mark, if you were to book, one second, Trev. Mark, if you were to pick a book, what would be your top go-to book that you'd like to look at?
You mean Andy?
Sorry, Andy. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
For me, it'd be, 71 Guns, I would agree, is a fantastic book. It's really easy to read, and it's one of them you can't put down. For me, I think it's Tom Whittaker's Arsenal Story. So it was actually published shortly after his death. But Whittaker joined Arsenal in 1919 as a player. He had to retire from playing in 1925. He became the reserve team trainer, as they were then, which is equivalent to a physiotherapist today, and then became first team physio in 1927. And he became Herbert Chapman's right-hand man throughout the early 1930s. And also, when George Allison took over running the team, or as manager, Allison was effectively running the team, became assistant manager just after the war. And then in 1947, he took over as manager. And so it covers his whole life, because he died shortly after the book, or shortly before the book was actually published. But it takes you from when Arsenal were a struggling team, struggling in the first division, all the way through their glory years of the 30s, and when he took over and what it was like to run a club. And again, it's a really easy book to read, but it just tells you everything there was about the club and running the club, and what happened at the club, and the buy-in of the big name players. And it's it covers quite a long period that he was there. So he was there for almost 40 years. And I can remember reading it the first time, and I just turning the pages, and there was always something. Oh wow! Now he's talking about Alex Chamberlain. Now he's talking about Ted Drake, and now he's talking about his time during the war. And then taking over at Arsenal. They went 17 games unbeaten from the start of the season in 47-48, his first season in charge, and went on to win the league quite easily. And then the trials and tribulations he had as a manager, dealing with players as well. And there was no holds barred. He talked about everything. And so I would highly recommend that. And you can read that on our website. So on our website, we've got loads of books you can read. They're the complete books. You can read them free of charge.
Oh wow! Okay, Trevor, you're very much a reader. Anything to add on books, and what ones you like?
Do you know what? I am very much a reader of Arsenal books, Fergus, and I have many. Thankfully, I enjoy them all. But I prefer the biographies. I like the biographies, and my favourite is Bob Wall's. Bob Wall's biography. He was the secretary of the Arsenal Football Club for many, many years, from the heart, and it was written just before the 1970-71 team won trophies. So you have to take as you read it, I had to take myself back to that time and think about why he was writing it. And if you read it and look at it from that perspective, it was a brilliant read. Some of the stuff that he thought of was like some of the things he said and he thought that would happen in the future have never happened. But a lot of it that he mentioned, that he talks about, actually has come to fruition. It's actually happened, you know. I can't be specific because I can't really remember, but I can remember reading it and thinking, oh my God, how did he think of that in the late 60s, early 70s, you know? So I very much enjoyed Bob Wall's book. 71 Guns is a fantastic read, Fergus, if you get a chance. I've got a copy of it, Fergus, but I'm not lending it to you, so find your own. Yeah, so I like the Arsenal biographies. I've got many of them, but Bob Wall's has been my favourite so far, amongst others. Whittaker's is brilliant. Yeah, Allison's is good. Yeah, there's many good biographies, but Bob Wall was the best for me. Just
if you were to pick one more book, and this here's on the website as well, just if you go to the arsenalcollection.org.uk, you can see all these books that are on here. The list goes on and on and on. And as you say, you just click on continue reading and those books are there for you to read. So, you know, if you click on the guy's website and away you go. Mark, if you had to pick one more book, what would you say is your next favourite book and why?
The Arsenal Shirt.
The Arsenal Shirts.
Because it's just it does exactly what it says it's going to do. It's a massive coffee table book about the Arsenal Shirts.
I bought it on the back of you guys.
Excellent.
It's got lots of pictures, so it's really good for me. Really good for me.
It's just fantastic. It's just got all the shirts. You think, right, that's when I started supporting them and going through. And it's just brilliant. You know, there's so much history there, and they go into the intricacies of, you know, who made it, etc. It's probably a bit much for the average person just reading it. If you want to talk about a shirt, but it just goes into it, and it's just brilliant. It's just so good. You know,
Andy, your last book you'll go with, and don't use Trevor's Bible because I know he'll want to talk wax lyrical about it.
I was going to say the Arsenal Shirt as well, but Mark beat me to it. But I will go for a book written by two Arsenal fans called Scott Grant and Colin White. It's just called Arsenal. It's a complete record, history and full record up until 1988. No, not that one. Fred Ollier's one is good, but the one by that's the one. So this has got a lot more text to it than Fred Ollier's book. Fred Ollier's book is fantastic. You know, he's like, my God. But this one was written, and these two people, no one had ever heard of them before. But the amount of the amount of research they've done to put this book together back in 1988 was absolutely incredible. And I know loads of people that are collectors and Arsenal historians. No one knows these two people. They came and they disappeared within a year. But the historical text to it is pretty much faultless. You know, so if you follow me on Twitter, almost every day I'll pick an argument with someone saying what you've written there is absolute rubbish, and here's why. Because so many Arsenal history books have been written and they haven't done their research properly. All they've done is copied someone else. But these two guys, Scott Grant and Colin White, can't find a fault with it, you know, but it's just been lost in history. It's a really difficult book to get hold of. You're probably looking to pay £100 for a copy of this book now. Because there were so few copies made, and I didn't buy it originally in 1988 because I looked at it and it had been printed like on a dot matrix printer.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look good, but if you start reading it, the content of it is absolutely fantastic, right back to the very beginnings of the club. And yeah, I just can't say highly enough of what they did, because as a historian, the research they put into it was absolutely fantastic, and like I say, it's faultless. The only thing I will pick them up on was it finishes at the end of 87-88, and they did a biography of all the managers, and they said about George Graham. Basically, this is a make or break season for George Graham. Can he do it? We're not 100% certain. And then the following season, we went on to win the league.
Brilliant. There was a couple of other books we touched upon by mistake. The Arsenal A Complete Record by Fred Holly, and also Behind the Scenes in Big Football by Leslie Knighton. We're not going to cover those, but Trevor, do I need to ask what your favourite book is?
Well, apart from these boys, it's just got me thinking. I read a book not too long ago, probably last year, right, about an Arsenal player. And it's called Stuck in a Moment, right? And it's the ballad of Paul Vasson. And a lot of the younger fans nowadays will say, Paul Vasson? Who's Paul Vasson, you know? But Paul Vasson scored one of the most important goals in the history of Arsenal Football Club. He scored in a 1-0 win away at Juventus in the semi. These boys are going to pull me up. The semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup in 1980, I think. We're drawn at home to Juventus, and they were massive favourites to beat us. No English team had ever won in Torino, in Turin at Juventus, and we went over there, and Paul Vasson came on as a substitute as an 18-year-old and scored the winner. One of the most important goals in our history, as I say. Unfortunately, we lost the final on penalties, but the reason that it sort of cut me to shreds, it lifts you and then it drops you, because Paul Vasson was unfortunately, it suffered injury after injury, and not long after he had to retire from the game, and he couldn't handle it, couldn't take it, and he ended up passing away of a drugs overdose, living on his own in a flat. I think it was in Bristol, and it was one of the most harrowing stories of an Arsenal football player. But it was a book I couldn't put down because I was just reading about this person, and it could be any of us, you know. So much success as a young man taken away from him, and he couldn't handle it. So if anyone wants to read a really interesting book, I would recommend it's Stuck in a Moment, the ballad of Paul Vasson. A brilliant bit of writing for me.
Okay, so obviously we're longer than normal. Well, this is a summer special, so it is going to be a little bit longer. So we'll go for about 10 or 15 minutes more, if that's okay with you guys. I've got 2 or 3 questions, and one we've covered already, which is by Steve F. Can you rank the top 3 managers ever, and where does Bertie Mee stand? I'll go to you, Mark, first, and then over to Andy.
Well, we've covered, haven't we? Chapman, Graham, and Wenger.
Okay, and where does Bertie Mee stand in that then?
Next,
I suppose.
See, now I don't think great Bertie Mee was I think Tom Whitaker was probably better than Bertie Mee.
Oh, okay.
And
well,
the thing with Bertie Mee is he relied on Don Howe.
Mm.
Well, no, because Alisson relied on Whitaker as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Bertie Mee, if it wasn't for Don Howe, I don't think we would have won the double. It was Don. If you listen to the players, the former players talk about Don Howe, and then you read their autobiographies, he was the man that really got them going.
Mm.
What Bertie Mee was a good manager of Don Howe. It's probably the best way to put it. And he got Don Howe to do all of the tactical work.
Yeah,
but it's quite similar in a way to Mercer and Alisson, isn't it? At Man City, in that Alisson didn't really make it as a manager, but he was a brilliant coach. And the same with Don Howe, he was a brilliant coach.
Yeah.
And Mee was the manager, so it was all on Mee effectively. I know Don Howe was the brains behind the whole thing.
Yeah.
But if he had been the manager, that wouldn't have happened. The fact that Mee was the manager, it did happen.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying it's like a relationship, because I read again another Tosser book about Malcolm Alisson, which is a really good book, and it's quite a similar thing, because just before that Alisson had coached Man City, and then with Mercer as the manager, but they gelled really well, but on their own it wouldn't have happened. And I think it's the same with 71. You know, if Howe wasn't there, there's no way we'd have been anywhere near it. But if Mee wasn't there, Howe most likely wouldn't have got us to that stage. So, you know, it's a relationship, isn't it?
Yeah. Trev, did you want to add on there? Where would you put Mee in relation then to your top 3 managers?
Well, I agree completely with the lads. Don Howe was an amazing football coach, not just of the Arsenal football team, but of the England football team as well. He was England coach for a good while. Bertie Mee, obviously, they worked together as a team, as the lad said. But I just struggle thinking that Bertie Mee broke that 71 winning team up too soon. I think he sold players who were still at the top of their form. McClintock, George, to name but a couple. And so, although I thank Bertie Mee from the bottom of my heart for giving me my first memory of Arsenal winning a trophy and a fantastic memory that I'll treasure forever, I just struggle thinking that did he break that team up too soon. But having said that, would Don Howe have had a say in the breaking up of that team as well? So there's angles to look at it. But yeah, but Mee's fourth on the list for me as well, same as the boys.
No, because Howard left by then, hadn't he?
But he?
Yeah. He got the ump and left straight after the double, didn't he?
Where did he go?
Yeah.
West Brom.
West Brom, that's it. Yeah. Point taken. Yeah. So there you go. So Mees broke that side up.
And then when he come back, Terry Neal started winning. Well, Terry Neal won something, and we became a half-decent cup team, didn't we? Under Don Howe. Well, under Terry Neal, but with Don Howe.
Yeah. So you all agree that Herbert Chapman was a pretty damn good manager, and is up there probably as the best manager in your eyes. How good was the Herbert Chapman team in the ability of their in ability, goals, and the records? That's from Mohamed Patel. Andy?
Well, you can't really fault him. When he joined in 1925, he said, I need 5 years to sort this team out. And in his fifth season, Arsenal won their first ever trophy. Okay, it wasn't the greatest league season, but he'd taken them 5 years to build up the team. And 1930, during the summer of 1930, Arsenal didn't buy anyone. So he decided at that point, he's got his team. And then the following season, 30-31, they won the league by a canter. They only lost 4 games. And he'd set his team up in a certain way, and he knew that he could bring, if there were injuries, he had the right players in the reserves to come in. And, like I say, if you was to take out a subscription with the British Newspaper Archive for a couple of weeks, take out a free trial with it and read the match reports, it's nothing but superlatives for that team. They were all out attacking, and they knew how to defend as well. And that they just, and as I said before, he didn't necessarily have to buy loads and loads of star players. All he did was he picked the right players that he could mould, like as I said, George Graham did. But they were the best team in the 1930s, and again, as we said before, Chapman set the team up, and he set the backroom staff up as well in such a way that they could just carry on after his death. But they were great. You read the newspaper reports, and it's nothing but fantastic praise for Arsenal. And as much as people like to say, everyone started hating Arsenal in the 1930s because they kept winning things, they didn't. You read the newspaper reports, and they absolutely loved the Arsenal team for the way that they played, and Alex James was that linchpin, and Bastin was the one who it was probably Bastin that scored supplied more goals than James did because of the way that the team played. But they were brilliant, and they were talked of as being the best team by a long way.
Mark, a manager that is held in equally high esteem as Chapman was Wenger, and James Power asked the question, which I thought was quite appropriate for you, considering the way that you started when we were talking about Wenger earlier, saying he maybe peaked too soon and that you weren't as big of a fan of him towards the end. So James asked the question, if Wenger was given the money that Arteta has been given, he had won many more trophies. How many more trophies would he have won? I think is what he's trying to say. If he was instructed to spend and not be the bank manager that he was, that people believe he was in the end. So, what's your thoughts on that one then, Mark?
Well, I believe that Arsenal massively underperformed under Wenger. In bearing in mind the team that he assembled was quite astonishing. If you think of the players and everything, and the fact that we could only do a few FA Cups along the way between a certain time, we didn't win anything for 3 years, which obviously was down to Ferguson being the brilliant manager as well. I don't think the money's got anything to do with it, to be honest. Wenger got and assembled a brilliant team, but they didn't win the trophies that they should have done. And that's a big gripe, I think, with Wenger. But
Trev, what? Go on, sorry, Mark. Finish. Sorry.
No, I'm saying, but obviously the fact that he then went through unbeaten a season, raises that quite a bit. But if you break it down, he won a double. That's 4 trophies. They then won a few FA Cups, and then they won the league again. And then he had the longest ever period of an Arsenal manager not winning a thing.
So are you saying without the Invincibles, that Wenger wouldn't have been deemed as successful and as in high esteem that he is among the Arsenal faithful?
No, not myself faithful. I mean, from a historical perspective.
Okay.
Without that, his record wasn't really that. It wasn't really that good, to be honest.
I get your point. What's your thought, Trev?
Well, Wenger. Now that Wenger is history and quite long gone in the past now, comparatively speaking. For me, Wenger had 2 definitive periods. He came in and he took George Graham's team that was left to him, and he developed it and he tweaked it and he added a bit to it, and he got them fitter, I believe, and it showed, and we won lots of things, right? And then after the Champions League final, we go downhill, don't we? And we've now, boys will put me right, but I think this current period we're in is the longest we've ever gone without winning the league title since we first won it. This is how exceptional it is now. We've never gone this long without winning. We won it in 2004. It's now coming up to 20 years, and we've never gone that long without winning it since we first won it. And for me, as much
you're right. Yeah.
You what?
You are right.
Oh, thank you. I'm honest. But
bless you.
As much as I love Wenger and I love what he did, I think the cause of us not winning too much recently is because of what he left us. You can't argue the fact that he left us in a mess. Our greatest manager, I'll accept that argument happily, and I won't argue against it because he's done things that we could only dream of seeing as fans. But what he actually left us with when he went wasn't good. We were in absolute turmoil. I have the greatest sympathy for Unai Emery because I think he had absolutely no chance. How he cajoled that team to a UEFA Europa League final, I will never know. They let him down in that. And then, of course, Arteta's had to come in and pick up the pieces. And for a young man, I think he's done amazingly, Mikel Arteta, in picking up from where, taking Emery out of it, picking up from where Arsene Wenger left us. Because I must reiterate, I don't want to get my head bitten off. Arsene Wenger is amazing, was an amazing manager. Done things for our football club you could only ever imagine. Fantastic. But what he left us with at the end of his legacy, if you want, that he left us with, we were in trouble. And it's taken a long, long time to put that right. Last season was the first time we've seen it. And so, yeah, I have mixed emotions about Arsene Wenger.
To be honest, it's a tad of a shame that it's not tarnished, but it's just that it's left that sort of toxicity that was around towards the end of his reign. It was a little bit sad that happened, but he's done some great things. Danny from the Bergkamp Wonderland podcast says Wenger was runners-up in the Premier League, the FA Cup, League Cup, Charity Shield, UEFA Champions League, the Emirates Cup, and that's a lot of failure. The Emirates Cup. We're trying to win our own trophy at times.
Can I just say something about it as well? For those of us that remember George Graham, we will say that George Graham was absolutely fantastic for what he did when he came into Arsenal. But his last season there, he'd been there too long, hadn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was like he'd lost he'd lost the dressing room and he'd lost the ability to carry on. And I think that he was ready to go anyway. If he hadn't if he hadn't, been fallen foul of what he did fall foul of, I think he would have left at the end of that season anyway. And the same is with Wenger. He went on a few seasons too long, and I think even if we'd given him, if the club had given him the money that they've given to Arteta, it wouldn't have worked. It still wouldn't have worked. He would have spent the money, and it wouldn't have been the right players, and it wouldn't have been the right players for the team.
I do remember
the disjointed team.
I do remember the experiment of who tried to convert us into almost Spain, all the small players, lower centre of gravity and everything else. Look, light-hearted end to this because we had a question put in on Twitter. We were going to talk about the fire in the Manor Ground, but
what fire? What
fire?
I know you mentioned that fire.
Suffragettes. The Suffragettes fire.
There's a question. I've typed it so we can put it up on the screen, but it's from Henty, who's in Finland. It's a bit late for him to be watching this, but a question for both you gents. Just a quick sort of synopsis. The most recent eye-opening finding that you will find, like a really blimey, this that we did this. So
we didn't know this. Yeah.
Mark?
Yeah.
Any core blimey, you wouldn't believe this sort of story that you know?
No, core blimey would believe it, but there was one manager who the club didn't actually have a photo of, and myself and Andy found it, and we got it published in the programme.
And which manager was that?
Elcott, George Elcott, second manager.
William Elcott.
Sorry, William Elcott. Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Mark's been pulled up.
It should be George Elcott, but it was William Elcott.
I'm clipping that piece.
Yeah, it was Elcott or Elcott, whatever it was. Yeah, so we basically he went to Brighton after Arsenal, which we didn't know. We had no idea, and we were contacted by someone Brighton supporters, History Society, and he said, "Are you interested in this? This is him." And we said, "Magic." So he sent us it over, and we got it published in the programme with the right name.
With the right name. Andy, have you got something probably more factually correct than Mark?
I'd just like to say that Henty, the guy that put that question in, he's been really, if you don't follow him on Twitter, he's well worth a follow. He's from Finland, but he's been really, really helpful over the last year or so. Yeah, and he's put together some lists on our website of all the order in which players have scored goals, players that have scored hat tricks for the club, and he's got another one that we're going to put on there about the youngest players. And I did have something else that I wanted to say that we found recently, and I can't remember it. While Mike was talking, I was thinking, oh yeah, I'll bring that one up, and I've bloody forgotten it. So
was it about the fire in October?
But listen, we just so people know, there's been an ongoing debate, let's say it, going on Twitter, and Mark and Trevor have both been blocked by this individual. This individual is a Notts Forest fan, and he's honestly, some of his information is unreal. He's using some clickbait sort of website to substantiate his argument against two historians that have written 5-6 books between them. So I think before he even started, he lost that battle, and it was all about why Arsenal moved north of the river, and he was trying to say or insinuate maybe that we were skint, we burnt down our own stadium, which is absolutely far from it. And if you go back and look at our Arsenal history podcasts, I think you'd probably have to look at the second in the series, which is when we moved to Highbury. We were called the Bank of England at that point, weren't we, Andy?
No, that was much later. That was in the 1930s.
That was much later.
No.
I nearly blocked that one. Well,
yeah. Look, but that's another thing that is
this Twitter malarkey, right? This Twitter malarkey, Andy, you've got to keep it going, because I reckon about once a fortnight now, you'll see something pop up on Twitter. Someone's read something on Google or got it in their head that we bribed our way into the league, or we were the Bank of England club because everybody gave us money. And if you've not seen it, people, Andy tends to jump straight on them. and then you just get the popcorn out and watch it develop.
Yeah.
And before you know it, I normally chip in a bit because it annoys me as well, and then other people join in, and Mark will have a go, and then before you know it, this person has removed their tweets, disappeared off the face of the earth, and blocked us all, and it's absolutely hilarious. Don't argue with these boys about the Arsenal. You've been given fair warning, anybody. Don't argue with these boys about the Arsenal because, as me and Fergus have found out too regularly, you come off second best.
Did he block you?
It looks like we were promoted to the big telly in Gav's house. We're on the big, it looks like probably a 55-inch TV there. So hello, mummy, I'm on telly. Guys,
the kids are watching it.
Yeah, well, we kept it clean. Mm-hmm. And he's got Daddy's merch on, so that's all right. He's listen, thank you very, very, very much as always. I thoroughly enjoyed doing the series that we done a couple of summers back. I learned loads, as you know. Okay, I got some of the chronological order wrong, but I've actually, some of it has stuck in there, and it really has been interesting. I've loved doing this. I know Trev. Well, look, Trev, you wax lyrical. How much you've loved this?
Boys, it's been too long. It's been too long since we last had a chat like this on this podcast. And as soon as I found out we were up to do it about a month ago, we were planning doing it. I've just been, honestly, a 61-year-old bloke, and I've been like a 4-year-old kid in a sweet shop. I've been so excited about doing it. Yeah, you make my night every time. You embarrass me a little bit when you show me my lack of knowledge, but I could sit and listen to you and talk to you boys all night. So I know Fergus is going to finish off now, but Mark, Andy, genuinely from me, you two cracking lads. We're going to have to get together soon and have a beer or something. And just thanks again, mate. It's been a pleasure, boys. An absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Well, you won't remember it very much, but we did bump into Mark in the Emirates, and he's much taller than he looks on a podcast. But you had 2.5 pints of shandy by that stage, so yeah.
I remember seeing Mark. Yeah, it was around about. Oh yeah. I do remember. Yeah.
Guys,
I'm much taller than I look. I am, yeah.
Give people a shout out to where. Well, I think they already know where to find you guys. Andy, just let people know how they can follow you and what's next coming from you guys.
Okay, so the first thing I'd like to say is thanks to Trev for referring to us as boys, because I'm not too far behind you, but it's lovely to be referred to as a boy.
You're welcome, sir.
But our website now is thearsenalcollection.org.uk, and there's tons of Arsenal stuff on there. Constantly putting stuff on there, and there's always new stuff going on there. And that's my Twitter handle. There you go, got that. So if you want to see me getting into loads and loads of arguments with Chelsea and Man City fans and whoever, then feel free to follow me.
And if you want to see a sidekick backing him up, Mark, where are they going to find you? Oh, he's a man of so many words, isn't he?
In actual fact, I think I'm only a year younger than Trevor.
Oh, yeah.
You don't look 80.
I'm 29, so yeah.
Guys, it'd be rude for us not to just finish off with a little bar of this song. Guns and Yellow Ribbons, an Arsenal podcast by Arsenal fans for Arsenal fans. Thank you, boys. I could see Andy with his hands up in the air while that song was on. I love it. I've got a full 3.5 minute one for our first show that goes back, which was on Threads, actually. We put it up on Threads the other day. Boys, thank you very much.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us again. If people like what we do, go on to subscribe us on YouTube, and you can follow us on all the other social media platforms. Guys, thanks very much and good evening.
Thanks for listening to Guns and Yellow Ribbons, an Arsenal podcast by Arsenal fans for Arsenal fans. Follow us on Facebook at Guns and Yellow Ribbons or Twitter at Guns and Ribbons. And remember to rate and review us too. Up the Arsenal.